Hello and welcome to Upside Daily. This is a daily podcast that will empower you on your journey to know God, love people, and impact your world. I'm your host, Ioannis Dekas, and today we're going to talk about the story of two men. We started a journey on understanding the power of identification with Christ. And I am excited about what God is doing through this podcast in people's lives all across the globe. I want to start off today by telling you about a story, a personal story. I was on a plane, a journey from Johannesburg, Oliver Tambo, back to London Heathrow, where my family lives here in the UK. And as we were sat on the runway, now I grew up in South Africa, but I'd lost a little bit of understanding as to what's happening in the sports scene. They're obviously following, what's happening locally here in the United Kingdom. But as we sat on the runway, ready for takeoff, there was this moment when the pilot announces, and we were all wondering what is he going to announce about? And he says, "Hello, this is your captain speaking." He says, "I just wanted to let you know that the Blue Bulls have just won the Currie Cup." And in that moment, literally 50, 60 people that were sat around me here, just in a moment. I mean, there was no conversation, nobody was speaking to each other, but these 50 or 60 people jumped up literally as far as their safety belts could allow them, and hands were in the air, and they were shouting, "Yay!" And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I didn't even know all these people were here. And in that moment, I understood something about the power of identification. I sat there on that plane thinking to myself, these guys, they hadn't even been looking at a screen. They weren't on the field. They actually didn't consider anything. They didn't kick a ball. They didn't even buy a ticket, and yet they felt that they had won. And this is what happens to us in the power of identification. When we truly identify ourselves with something, it impacts our lives. It impacts the way we think. It impacts the way we understand our own identity. For in that moment on that airplane, those 50, 60 people that were sat here around me, they identified themselves as Blue Bulls. They won because the team had won. And that's really what the whole Bible is about. It's about two men, the first Adam and the last Adam. You see, the old man that you and I, that we know of, was born from Adam. We are identified, or were identified in Adam. The whole human race was identified in the disobedience of Adam. But now that is no longer our reference. The last Adam, not the second Adam, the last Adam, the new man who is called Christ, he has now become our reference, because everybody in the human race originated, from the Garden of Eden, and out of the first Adam. That was our reference. Your nationality, where you live, and what language you speak doesn't really matter. You and I were identified in Adam. But when Christ came, that changed. And today, I want to read us a portion of scripture from Romans chapter 5. It's a little bit of a lengthy portion of scripture. I want to read 7 verses from verse 12 to 19. But in this portion of scripture, the Bible really unpacks something about our identity. Now, the Apostle Paul writes, and he says, when Adam sinned, the entire world was affected. Sin entered human experience, and death was the result. And so death followed sin, casting its shadow all over humanity, because all have sinned. Sin was in the world before Moses gave the written law, but it was not charged against them where no law existed. Yet death reigned as king from Adam to Moses, even though they hadn't broken a command the way Adam had. You see, you and I are referenced as sinners because of what Adam did, not because of what we did. But now scripture goes on and says the first man, Adam, was a picture of the Messiah, Christ, who was to come. Now there is no comparison between Adam's transgression and the gracious gift that we experience. For the magnitude of the gift far outweighs the crime. It's true that many died because of one man's transgression, but how much greater? Oh, I love that in Scripture. How much greater will God's grace and His gracious gift of acceptance overflow to many because of what one man, Jesus Christ, did for us. And this free-flowing gift imparts to us much more than what was given to us through the one who sinned. For because of one transgression, we all faced a death sentence with a verdict of guilty, but this gracious gift leaves us free from our many failures and brings us into the perfect righteousness of God, acquitted with the words, not guilty. And listen to this verse. It says, death once held us in its grip, and by the blunder of one man, death reigned as king over humanity. But now, how much more are we held in the grip of grace and continue reigning as kings in life, enjoying our regal freedom through the gift of perfect righteousness in the one and only Jesus Christ. In other words, just as condemnation came upon all people through one transgression, so through righteousness, one act of righteousness, the act of Jesus' sacrifice, that perfect righteousness which makes us right with God and leads us into a victorious life. This is now available to all. One man's disobedience opened the door for all of humanity to become sinners. So also, one man's obedience opened the door for many to be made perfectly right with God. You are acceptable to Him. When I read this, when I think of this, here's the power of the moment. You can identify yourself with the brokenness in Adam, or you can start seeing yourself in the victory of Christ. Do you know what's sad to me? Is that whilst we are actually positioned in the victory of Christ, that from that vantage point, we still see ourselves broken in Adam. I think that sometimes breaks God's heart, because when you identify with the brokenness in Adam, can I tell you, everyone around you suffers the consequences. Often people think, when we disobey God, or when, we're only disobeying God for ourselves, or when we reference ourselves in Adam, we're only referencing ourselves in Adam for ourselves. It's me, it's my life, I can do what I want. Really, it doesn't affect anybody else in terms of this. But let me tell you this, when you choose to disobey God, when you choose to reference yourself in the brokenness of Adam, your reference in Adam affects your family, it affects your children, it affects your children's children. And however, when you choose to bring yourself into this reference of Christ, it affects not just your life, but affects your family, your future generations, and it brings you into this space of His victory. Man, I trust that today's Upside Daily has been a deep stir on your personal journey. I look forward to connecting with you again tomorrow with Upside Daily as we continue this journey on discovering the power of identification in Christ. Live blessed.